Thank you for being with us.
Oh, yeah.
How are you today? You had an early ride.
Uh, yeah. We were saying, we were saying off air that I've had a little bit of a turbulent day as far as my sleep schedule goes, but uh, I'm well in most of the important ways, and I'm excited to be talking to you. So that's.
I'm so glad you're here. And, you taught for us last month and you'll be back for us in September here at Community Building Artworks. And over probably the course of the last 2-3 weeks, I have watched your poetry film, Dear Lover, a lot of times. Like, let's say like a couple of dozen times, because I
Wow.
love it so very much. I've taught with it. I've just used it as a meditation with different people. And then reading your bio just now, and this idea of like movements and world making and world breaking and altering, I feel like that video embodies that, in that it doesn't look away from what is wrong in the world or what is hard in the world, or the
Mhm,
sort of ways that it is wrecking and wrecked.
mhm,
But it also calls us forth to accept that and walk into another version of ourselves. Can you talk
mhm.
about sort of maybe how you, and this is such a big question, you can be like, no, this is great. But how do you, while staying, you stay pretty rooted in the world, right? And that shows in your work. You're rooted in pop culture. You're rooted in the devastation and honest difficulty of the world. But you also, there's this like joy and tenderness and light in your work and in your being and in your teaching. And I just wondered if you like have any practices around that.
I think poetry is the practice.
Mm,
Um, like it feels like, so I think part of it is responsibility, in the sense that I came of age, and I'm coming of age through cultures of spoken word primarily. And I was reading a book by a spoken word artist the other day, and in the introduction she called spoken word like the political wing of hip hop. And I'm not saying that like my work is naturally or like, inextricably tied to hip hop, but I the notion that spoken word is the political wing of a certain form of uh, oral performance, yeah, feels resonant. And it's not that I view spoken word as like inherently um activist, or that I'm like taking on titles and honorifics every time I speak on stage or write a poem. Rather that I think there's like a cultural urge to attend in that way, or like to find the balance between um this sort of gaze that wishes to reckon with suffering and reckon with injustice, but also if that's all one is doing, uh, then rather like it's also my responsibility to situate my humanity as fully as I can
mm,
into whatever context that I'm talking about. So like merely like pointing a finger or devising eloquent rants, like it gets stale. So like
uh-huh.
my my general understanding is that people come to poetry so as to have the human condition reconciled in some way. So like, it's like a confrontation between human and human,
Right.
and so yeah, the balance that I'm trying to strike is one where you see my humanity, but that you understand that um, part of participating in this thing we're doing, this thing we're making, the worlds that we inherit and craft as human beings is suggesting revision.
Yeah.
So so I have some stake in suggesting revisions, but I'm a naturally optimistic human, I think,
Mm,
or I try to be both optimistic and tender in my way of being, and so that has to come to the fore as well. So it's
yeah.
always It's always both.
Yeah. I mean, and there's this sort of, I think too, like, I think often to myself that like capitalism, and as we practice art as a job, it's capitalist,
Mhm.
doesn't care if I live or die. I have to turn to that thing of like, well, why am I, and you know, and it like, it wrecks my mood if I'm only writing dark and I can't.
Mhm.
And also reading, right? And so there's this sort of real grace in reading a poet who is holding both things in their work as you do. Um, I'm interested in, and not placing you as this sort of spokesperson or authority on it, but like what does, so you said spoken word is the political wing of hip hop, was this thing that you repeated, but what does spoken word, how does it differ from poetry on the page for you? Or does
Um,
it?
yeah, increasingly in terms of writing, it doesn't. Um, that might also be symptomatic of the fact that like we're surviving a pandemic. So I've just been I haven't performed. I haven't done anything that's felt like spoken word uh in quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more I read, I understand the vastness of the ways that poems can become or be poems. You know, like there are so many ways to configure poetic meaning, poetic sense. And so really, I'm just trying to I'm just trying to write well, and then like
Yeah.
whatever I bring to the stage or whatever I bring to the live context is a matter of me sort of embodying my relationship to the thing that I've written. So like for me, um, it's not that spoken word um, is like a form or genre of writing. It's more in the act of disseminating it in a live context.
Right.
Although like like reading my book and sort of feeling people's reactions to the book, I can feel and sort of know the ways in which spoken word has sort of kind of inextricably influenced my way of writing, because like
Mm-hmm.
my sense of audience is different, and so
Yes.
then therefore like my sense of risk taking on the page or my sense of what it means to communicate is different. So my poems might tend to be um, like direct in a certain way. So like I want to be understood, So like these sort of erudite or opaque poetics, like it doesn't work for me, because like anything that I write that I like will eventually be read for an audience, and it just is no fun for me to to read a poem that I don't think people will understand. And so I think yeah, in that way, spoken word has sort of influenced my sense of who I'm talking to and how. But like when I encounter the page or when I come to the page, I'm just thinking about like, hey man, Araceli's Gramai is great. Ross Gay is great. Dion Brand is like, I'm just thinking
Right.
of these sort of
Um,
these sort of idols. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Who also, do this thing where there's so much delight and
mhm.
joy. I mean, it's as much rigor applied to joy as it
Right.
is to,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
naming the ways that the world is hard. When you said, I want to be understood, I thought a lot about how often we are, first of all, discouraged from understanding ourselves,
Mhm.
like from naming our feelings, right? Like we live
Mhm.
in a world, I
Mhm.
think, where we're sort of pushed to drive on, and have often been raised in families and in communities where, like, there's a risk,
Mhm.
right? There's a
Mhm.
risk to needing anything. There is a risk to letting your emotions be out of control in any
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
right? There's this sort of like contraction.
Mhm.
Um, But when we decide to come to the page with I want to be understood, it means first like I'm going to sit here with my shit and understand it myself. How did you do that? Like, how did you start that? How old were you? I mean, anything. What comes to mind when you think about this sort of overturning the silence and deciding like, no, I want to be understood?
Yeah, there's so much. There's so much there. Yeah, it's a great question. I could I could spend a small lifetime trying to answer it. So I think, in the first sense, poets become poets precisely because they do not know what to say, more so than some sense that they know what to say. So even in the context of like me being a person who has like an equal capacity to name beauty or to like pronounce my joy, like even in being overcome by happiness or yeah, reckoning with the sublime, you know um I'm confounded by language, and so, or confounded by feeling often. And so language is a useful tool, and then poetry is like the most useful tool among the language tools that I have. And so coming to the page or like being a poet is a way of reckoning with the things that I feel and don't know how to say. So it's foremostly about trying to understand the distance between that which I know and feeling and that which I can know with my conscious brain, my conscious self, and tending to that gap. And so I've often said like poetry is the way that I've kind of charted my spiritual progress. And so it's like, yeah, you can read poems of yours and be like, oh yeah, like I was really preoccupied with this idea or this feeling, or I have a similar feeling now, but like my consciousness has grown in this direction, so I'm able to articulate it more fully, or whatever the case may be. So there's a value in that, but then also, in the context of wanting to be understood, um, I'm the sort of person where my entire career, so that is in terms of performance, in terms of collaboration, in terms of the way that I disseminate my work, it's really just about broadening the conversation, because broadening the conversation creates more threads of understanding and meaning for me. So like the more reflections I can create around the thing that I've said, the better able I am to like find new nooks of meaning and understanding, to be like, oh, like this is the effect, or uh you know perhaps like, oh, that's different than what I meant. Like all these things. I like the feedback. And so it's one way also of like refining my political ideas, so like I'll say a thing in a poem and then hopefully 1,000 people hear it or read it, and I'm like, hey, extend that in this way, or actually you're wrong about this or that. And so poetry is like, for me, the most efficient way of entering conversations and also like introducing people to the things that are like urgently important to me. And I think that sort of I don't know, discourse, or like that kind of dialectic relationship is just inherent to um the way we build community, the way people come to know themselves, is
I
through,
think
like,
I love that when you said broadening the conversation, you meant both the sort of interiority of broadening the conversation within yourself, between yourself and X or Y idea or emotion, but also broadening the conversation in terms of how you're engaging with other people, maybe people you don't even know, like people in the world. And there is that sort of, you talked about closing the gap between the irrational and emotional and the rational sort of experiences. And I think there is too that closing the gap between the internal experience and the experience of being a person living among other people, that is made possible by asserting your experience, maybe applying it more broadly, which is dangerous. It can be dangerous, right? To just be like, this is what happened to me. It must be what's happening to everyone else. But then to be able to take that feedback and grow your experience is a really beautiful thing. I wanted to know about your rituals. Do you have any rituals to get into the writing space, or even just like daily clearing your brain, clearing a funk from you?
Wow.
I like to know the witchiness of the people around me.
Yeah, you know, I think one of my struggles, or like one of the things that I'm maybe less satisfied with in my life, is that like art making is actually like the most developed ritual that I have, you know. So like, you know, there's so much talk about like self-care and like how to tend to myself. So like I don't have a lot of well-developed rituals for life that aren't around, you know, how am I gonna write this poem or make this album, or like, the poetry is the way that I tend to myself most readily, you know. And so what are my writing rituals? In the pandemic is different. I mean, I just write. I write if I can, you know, if I have the mental space. But in pre-pandemic times, I just wake up whenever I feel like it. Fart around on YouTube for
you go to YouTube right in the morning, first thing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like my comfort food, or like it's like when I'm not exactly sure how I want to move or what I want to do, and I'm just like waiting to receive an impulse from my consciousness, I'll just like whatever, watch a bunch I mean, Seema, I don't know if I'm allowed to you know.
Tell me what you're watching. You got it. You have to. What are you looking up?
Oh, it's
this
really
is
just
what
sports.
we were waiting to get
it's
to.
It's really just sports.
Is it like bloopers?
No, like sports talk or sports podcasts, or like, oh man, LeBron, you know, should have taken this shot in the fourth quarter. He shouldn't have passed the ball, and like, you know, like you know, like meaningless. Because I grew up consuming a lot of sports. Like so like in my self-image, sports and poetry like had equal sacredness. So like before spoken word was a thing, as a child, I thought I was going to become a sports commentator, because I knew that I had some capacity for speaking, or like that was going to be my thing, like using words. But I was like, oh yeah, sports. So I was like, I'm going to be a commentator, because I didn't know that one could make poetry writing into a job, you know, and still debatably. Yeah.
Which
Sorry, your question was about rituals, though.
No, but I want to know now. Now we've gone off. Which sports are you watching?
I'm consuming a lot of basketball. Like basketball is like my first love. You know, I do, or like can watch hockey, although like playoff hockey like gets on my nerves, and like I'm like skeptical of it. Like all like sports culture is not not nice necessarily. Like it all deserves skepticism, but hockey culture in Canada particularly, because I feel like there's a sort of I feel like white masculinity is like white masculinity is like more closely aligned with dominant culture, and then in Canada it's like maybe like doubly so, where it's like these men are me, like, you know, like the way the country sees itself and the way it sees its hockey are like, you can study the two in tandem, and it's like there's a lot of overlap, you know. And so I'm like, why am I watching this, or like what am I cheering for, you know? Because it's like,
what am I cheering for is a real thing with especially like bloody sports like hockey or American football, where you're just like, oh, what's happening?
Yeah, but I mean, I justify it by you know, because like every human experience is is a mode of storytelling. So I'm like, oh, I'm just interested in the stories,
right,
you
of
know?
course.
Yeah.
So you get on YouTube, you
Yeah.
watch people talking about games that you have watched already,
Or not.
or
Just
not? Okay.
because that's the thing. Like if you're like aware of the narratives, then you bring more to your watching experience. So if you know that like, oh, whatever, so and so lost in the finals last year to so and so, or there's a rivalry between this team and this team. When you watch, like all these
Yeah.
stories are in your head, and then you get to watch them like unfold. It's like yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I watch a lot of sports, and then I'll go to a coffee shop and write for 6 hours, until I'm tired, and then come back home and watch sports.
So that's your number one, your search on YouTube. You don't have another search on YouTube? So for example, I'll offer to you, I like to watch lava flows, like first I was just watching like video of lava, like National Geographic sort of things. And now I've gotten into these videos where people melt rocks and make lava. And then it's like lava versus a windshield, and they'll pour the lava on a windshield. Or
Wow.
lava versus iPhone, and they'll pour the lava. And I can watch that shit. What have you got that's like that?
Wow. What's my like obscure? That's a good question. I mean, I could open up YouTube right now, but I won't. Yeah, I don't have. Well, I mean, I guess to give myself there it is, to give myself credit. I guess like the other side of that is like I watch a lot of intelligent Black people talk. So it's like such and such lecture, or like, whatever, the Black radical, like, just yeah, I watch a lot of that sort of stuff, and then also jazz. So like, yeah, when I'm trying to like feed my brain, I'll listen to a lecture, or like, watch Dion Brand talk, or these sorts of things, and then listen to, because I think jazz is like the most nutritious music that I've encountered, or like it sounds the most like it best replicates the experience of trying to write poetry, insofar as like because like you can feel the thrust, or like the enormity of meaning, but also it's like slipperiness. So like the uncontained nature of like trying to express anything is there, but also like the different forms of sense making that get employed in the music making. And so it's like, oh, if I listen to jazz, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the best poem I've heard all day. So yeah. Just so I'm just trying not to make myself sound like a total.
No, we're gonna cut all of this stuff, and we're just gonna make it the YouTube sports stuff. I would 100%. I would 100% start watching sports if it was commentated by poets. So I just want to like drop that into the consciousness. I watch baseball mostly because it's very boring and I find that relaxing. And the commentators just like have all this space to say weird things to each other. But if it was a pair of poets, I watch the hell out of that. So
okay, I'll think about it.
Think about it. Get another poet and just like riff with them.
Wow. Yeah.